Let's go to the next presentation. Dr. António Rendas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want just to start by saying that I'm here replacing Filipe Abreu Fonseca, who is really the soul of the project that I'm going briefly to try and summarize. And it started basically by, I'm a skeptical about innovation in health. And I'll try to put my case forward. And what we try to do is to have a look at the inside of the innovation process. So all these shopping windows that you've been seeing, I'm being a little bit ironic about this, have a lot of background work, and I'm delighted to what I saw, particularly the presentation from Pedro and that presentation on the breast cancer. But we wanted to know really what was happening from the institutional and decision-making process side. Because we strongly believe that one of the lacks of information about innovation success really relates to the people who have to do the rest of the job. That means have to run companies and have to do the bread and butter, not just the caviar or the little small Swedish cake, and still have to do innovation. So we were very, very greedy about this. So what we did was to cooperate, Pedro Pita Barros, Filipe and myself. So we cooperate with Health Cluster Portugal, which is a network of health-related institutions from the academia to healthcare and business in multiple areas, including pharma and providers. And we approached the Health Cluster by saying we want to interview a number of CEOs from these institutions. So we didn't look at the people who did the work, like the ones you saw here. We didn't look at the ones that promoted the work. We really want to talk to the people that were already in the business, and we wanted to ask them how they were going to look about innovation within their own institutions. Of course, we are aware of our limitations. But I think there's a big paradox related with this, because we hear so much about innovation and progress, so glamorous, starting from the garage approach to the boot camps. But then when we talk to the companies, when we talk to the people who are really in business, we see that there's a gray area between these, particularly in countries like Portugal. So we want to do this. And since I've told you that my background is medicine and medical education, I started by asking, how does a very reputational journal like Academic Medicine, which is the journal of the Association of American Medical Colleges, very highly rated in the scores, and I looked at an old paper from 2008, from the editor-in-chief of Academic Medicine called Stephen Cantor, and he wrote a very small article about how do you describe innovation. And he did it because he had a problem. The journal wanted to publish an issue on medical education innovations, and he got loaded with papers. So he looked into the literature and said, how am I going to select these papers? So he developed this type of guidelines, which I think is very, very interesting, because from my point of view, they have to do exactly what the problems that we're facing when we want to make innovation socially relevant. And this is what I think is important. Pedro has given us a lead by involving the patients. Of course, we didn't talk to the patients, we didn't talk to the inventors, we didn't talk to the entrepreneurs. We wanted to look at a different perspective. And these bullets really show a lot of the questions that when we really want to make an innovation work, should be aware. It is the same thing as when you approach a peer-reviewed paper. So is there a clear and true description of the problem? That means, is really the problem important, relevant? Breast cancer is a very relevant problem. So this is what I think it is so important to have patients, because patients bring relevant problems. As you all know, a lot of the things related with pharma, for example, and these very highly rated papers that appear in Nature, when you want to commercialize them and reproduce them in the lab, some of these results are not as accurate as the ones that are very highly rated peer-reviewed papers related, for example, to drugs. So is there a problem? Is the problem relevant? do the other stakeholders view this issue as a problem? Who is affected and how is it affected? Have there been other solutions to be putting forward to address the same problem? Is the solution proposed really innovative? For example, is it new? Is it better? Is it reasonable in itself compared with other solutions? So are there any things, the question that you asked about the glove, all these things, and when you evaluate the paper, is exactly the same thing related to innovation. What are the principles, concepts and themes in which implementation is based? For example, he is a biomedical engineer. I was interested to talk to Peter about literacy. What is the literacy of the patients that use these devices, for example? Is there a problem with literacy when you use these devices that you develop? Because all these people that developed some of these devices are very differentiated people. So what happens with diabetes? What happens with chronic respiratory disease? So there are a lot of questions that should have a scientific approach besides being socially relevant. And my last question is that, is it sustainable? Is it able to be effective in 10 years' time? So we are trying to move from the usual question that I have here, what was done and did it work? So let's not rush. Let's try and talk to the people and see exactly what happened. So we did our study, and we had a question, and the question is, how is the decision-making process developed in an innovation setting in Portugal? So we were concerned about the Portuguese situation. So when we address the Health Cluster Portugal, we did it blindly, and we are very grateful to all the CEOs and senior people because it is anonymous. We published this as a book, but nobody knows the companies that were interviewed and the people that were interviewed. So we have this agreement with in the process. So we interviewed, we performed 18 interviews in 20 CEOs. There's a mistake there, so one of the males dropped. So it was in fact, we interviewed 14 males and 16 females. One dropped and was already excluded from the study. And Felipe interviewed all of them based on a standardized protocol that is in fact, I don't have time to go in detail about it, but it was a setup for interviews. But what we did was to use the standard set of questions in these 5 dimensions. So how was the idea created? What was the decision-making process? How was it implemented? How was it evaluated? And we tried to close the loop by asking what was learned from the process that generated new ideas, so that we wanted to go further on. And this was the basis of the interviews. And we tried, because the health cluster has got more than 100 members, we tried to be heterogeneous as far as the interviews. So out of the 6 clusters of the health cluster, we interviewed CEOs or senior managers from academia and health and education training, from healthcare providers, from pharmaceutical companies, from medical and health technologies, from consulting services, and from other areas like logistics, textiles, for example, and medical and other medical equipment besides the technology. So the purpose of the study, as I've already said, was really to understand how these institutions from the top, really the top, who had a job to do, they had to make a profit and run the business, were looking at innovation within their own institution and how, if the innovation was developed within the institution, how was it developed to the outside? So the question was this, and the results were interesting, and please forgive me for using the Portuguese, but I'll try and translate in English at least what I think is relevant for the benefit of the non-Portuguese speaking audience, but I really had no time to change all the sets of slides. So as far as the interviewed, it was as far as the generation of ideas, the people really, when asked about what is innovation, they really explain more using examples than by the concepts. And the focus was on innovation of the process and of the products on one side, and of the services, innovation of services on the other. And what we did find is that when there was an internal view, the main objective was for incremental innovation. This is quite obvious. And when it was for external innovation, this was really, the approach was much more disruptive. And of course, this has to do also with the nature of the companies and the CEOs, because some of the people that were interviewed belong to international companies, some of them were from local companies. So the challenge broadly is how can we really make this approach more disruptive within the institution without spoiling, if I may use in brackets, all the business that is within the institution. This was quite interesting. It went through all the questions that we asked and the answers that we got. The other thing that was interesting is that we felt that innovation was somehow sheltered within the institution. So people were ready to export innovation, even if there were service innovation or others, but they didn't want to change their own ethos. So the company or the institution had its own pace, and the innovation, even coming from the inside, was something that they want to do it, but want to remain what they were and what they were doing. So this was quite paradoxical, but this is the conclusion that we reached within the generation of ideas. And we think that there is a huge amount of ground that can be covered. For example, a list of good practices, minimal, that can be suggested so that people can really get out of their shell and claiming that they are innovators, but still remaining very traditional within their own institutions, which is quite interesting. That goes from a research institution to some technological or pharma institutions. Now, the other thing that we found is that, as usual in Portugal, people are very well prepared. So the list of the decision-making process was crystal clear. So everybody knew this in theory. So the list was here, the quality of the communication, the logistic, temporality, all this was here. It looked like they were good students. But when we looked at the way the decision process was being done, it looked very heterogeneous. So there was not a definite pattern that could be. So we believe that the process was totally unregulated, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Now the implementation was very Portuguese as well. So people complained. People complained that there were bureaucratic questions. The process was very slow. There was a lack of outside structure. And what we felt is that the internal process of learning could have been much more disruptive and not made of repetitions and stop and go and back and forth. So we felt that when we asked people about how they implemented the innovation, there was an urgent need to change mentalities within the organization and maybe find a space where this tension, which is important, very, very good for creativity, could be in a way more useful, so that these innovations, which we're asking where they come from, and some of them were bottom to top, had to have space, and that was not the case in most of the interviews. Although, as I say, people were very capable, very aware of the process of innovation, but the question of how to make the space for the innovation to grow within the institution with support from the leadership was not evident at all in the process. Now, the evaluation was very interesting because in none of the interviews there were specific parameters for evaluation of the innovation, except, as obvious, with the papers, the scientific papers that resulted from of course, there were other parameters, but related to the business number, the selling numbers, the relation with some of them value the relation with the universities, the relation between companies, academia, through the innovation process was quite considered important, but not, as I say, a hallmark of the process. So we believe that when we evaluate, you should recognize the need to value the risks and costs of innovation, and for example, maybe a national system of accreditation of innovation that could be neutral as far as public-private, not specifically a public approach. Of course, the risk was also somebody early today spoke about risk. There was obviously a risk. There was a reputational risk. Some of the people that were interviewed said we should be very careful about innovation because the reputational risk of failure if the innovation doesn't get off the ground could damage our reputation as far as an institution. But of course, there was a market risk. There's a legal risk. But what we think as a whole is that the way how people looked at risk was not within the core of their innovation process. So risk was something that was not considered a priority when we asked them about this regarding the effects of the innovation within each of the institutions. The other and the last question relates to what did people learn about going through the process, and was it helpful in generating new ideas? What we felt that was very positive is that people felt that there was a need to get more education and training of the health professionals throughout the process as they were trained, as they were inside, even within the institutions. So more stress on multidisciplinary and interprofessional approaches and sharing with other professionals, so that the innovation, which is for us a more horizontal approach, mobilizing multiple resources, could benefit from the vertical specialization of the people that are within the organization. So we feel that there is also a lot to learn about this learning process of having an innovation process within the institution. Now, very briefly, and to conclude, and the study, as I say, is published. It was published very recently in a book that is called exactly Innovation. To summarize it in English, looking to look at the inside. But the conclusions, the main conclusion that I felt could be useful for this presentation. In fact, if we looked at the inside of the innovation process within the institutions, the questions that still remain in the air is how can we go through the process of developing internal innovation so that the decision-making process and the leadership are totally involved. People complain, not bitterly, but complain very clearly that the links that they had with innovation within the institution, these were CEOs and senior managers, were not at all clear. And how can we then scale these at national and international level? The conclusion is that there are no recipes for a successful innovation process. There are specific contexts that should be taken into account, and this is something that I feel I cannot translate it by conviction, because conviction has a very different meaning in English, but it is I would say our belief that if we developed a national system to promote innovation in Portugal, less dependent on public funding, but very much depending on matching fund, as Pedro has shown here with his patient innovation, we believe that the institutions and the people that lead their institutions are quite capable to have very successful projects and to support the people that are within their own institutions. But this can only be done, we believe, by having a network of links between the public sector, the private sector, and the social sector that would, in fact, be able to have more, I would say, more solid approaches to innovation in health, instead of just working hard to get some type of funding that dies and then the project dies itself. So I believe that I've finished my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.